So good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the special webinar in the lead up to World Reef Awareness Day. I'm Abhishek, and I'll be moderating today's session. Now, I know World Reef Awareness Day isn't technically till the 1st of June, but we believe if we are early, so we're on time. So let's get a head start. After all, the reefs can't wait, and neither can we. World Reef Awareness Day is a really important moment to recognize the importance and beauty of our coral reefs. These crucial underwater systems support about a quarter of all marine life. They help protect the coastlines and sustain millions of people. But they're also incredibly vulnerable to rising sea temperatures, to pollution, and to other human impacts. In today's session, we'll focus on India's reefs, an incredibly diverse but often underappreciated part of our marine and natural heritage. From the turquoise atolls of Lakshadweep to the turbid, lesser known reefs along our west coast, these ecosystems are teeming with life and have stories waiting to be told. We're joined today by two amazing speakers who know them like the back of their hands. Dr. Vardhan Patankar, he's the Conservation Director at GVI. Vardhan brings a vast experience of working across India and globally on multiple thematics, including coral reefs, sustainability, fisheries, and marine conservation. And there's Sumer Rao. Sumer is a marine biologist with WWF-India, and he works primarily on coral reefs and projects focusing on the conservation of lesser-known species. Also with us here and supporting me run this entire webinar is Somrid Bhattacharya, my program communications colleague. So here's what to expect. We'll have a quick chat for around 45 to 50 minutes. It will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute session of Q&A. I request everyone, because we don't have like a one-on-one with the speakers here, so I request you to write the name of the person you want to address it to. So say Vardhan, and then just address the question on chat and we'll make sure that it comes up to him. So with that, let's dive right in. Okay, so let's begin by zooming out to the broader landscape of India's coral reefs. So we often don't think of India as a reef-rich country. We actually have a surprisingly wide range of reef ecosystems, each shaped by different oceanic conditions, histories, and challenges. From the offshore atolls in Lakshadweep to the fringing reefs in Andaman and Nicobar, there's a lot of diversity packed into our coastline. Vardhan, could you walk us through India's major reef systems and tell us what sets them apart? And then maybe Sumer, you could bring us back and talk about the often overlooked reefs along India's west coast and what makes them unique. Vardhan, over to you.
Thanks, Abhishek. So India has four major coral reef regions. Each one is unique in its setting in terms of how resilient they are, how beautiful they are, and of course, in terms of their biodiversity. So first, I would like to talk about Andaman Nicobar Islands because there's something that is the region which is very close to my heart. I've spent almost 15 years in the islands and serving the reef and range of other things. Andaman Nicobar Islands is situated in the Bay of Bengal. It's one of the most biodiverse region in India, reef region. And the islands, they host fringing reefs as well as barrier reefs, and they lie along a crucial marine corridor connecting India to Indo-Pacific region. So geographically, they are close to Southeast Asia or Coral Tangle, which is where it is believed that the life or reef originated there, and that hypothesis is true. And that's why you get Indo-Pacific species as well as you get some Atlantic species, Indian species. So it's incredibly biodiverse. The reef area is around 11,000 square kilometers, and there is a record of 225 coral species belonging to 61 genera. And because of this exceptional diversity, it supports complex web of reef-associated species. Such as if you're diving there, you'll get to see dense fish aggregations. Sometimes you'll be surrounded by swirls of barracudas or butterfly fish. There are a lot of shipwrecks, so you'll see giant groupers. There are sea turtles, all 5 species of sea turtles are found. And of course, there are a lot of colorful nudibranchs that are found in the area. And what really defines the reef, or what is a characteristic of the reef, is of course there's a lot of sedimentation because of runoff, and it's mountainous. Overall, the fishing is high. The overfishing is one of the major characteristic, and because of that, there is a decline in predatory reef fish. The overall fish diversity, despite of overfishing, is exceptional in many sites and making it fascinating place for both conservation and research. In terms of percent cover, I would say percent cover varies from site to site, but if I have to talk about average percent coral cover, then it is approximately 50 to 60% live coral cover. The second major reef region I would like to talk is Lakshadweep Islands. It is located in the Arabian Sea on the west coast. And they are, unlike Andamans, the Lakshadweep is atoll reefs. They're ring-shaped coral structure encircling shallow lagoons. So around all the islands, there is shallow lagoons, and then there is a reef. And they're quite rare in India. What makes Lakshadweep truly special is that it's crystal clear waters. So if you have dive or if you dive in Lakshadweep, you feel like you're in an aquarium because of the visibility. You, on a bad day, you get approximately 20-meter visibility, and a good day, you can get up to 40 to 50-meter visibility, which is incredible. And in terms of, because of that visibility, the reef look really beautiful. The reef area spans approximately 1,050 square kilometer, which is huge. And it supports around 104 coral species belonging to 40 genera. And what is really characteristic of Lakshadweep Islands is the aspect. So there is an east and west aspect, and the life, that marine life that you see along the east coast as well as of Lakshadweep as well as west is distinctly different. And if you're lucky, there you will see that's the only region where there is a mass coral spawning has been witnessed multiple times. You also see a lot of manta rays and spectacular marine life. And overall, if you are a diver, definitely it's worth visiting because of the visibility. The next, maybe we can talk a little bit about southern mainland, which is the Gulf of Mannar and Park Bay, which is also another major reef region. It is off the coast of Tamil Nadu. These, again, like Andaman, these are fringing reefs, often found alongside lush seagrass beds. So there are mixed meadow seagrass beds, and there are endangered species such as dugongs, turtles are found. It's a UNESCO site, Gulf of Mannar, and it's a biodiversity reserve. And it's one of the oldest, in fact, marine biodiversity reserve. And although it's close to mainland, there are a lot of other pressures such as fishing or pollution or overall human density. What is remarkable is that how biodiverse they are. So together, the Gulf of Mannar and Park Bay, covers approximately 365 square kilometer area, supporting 117 coral species across 37 genera. And the last, but not the least, is Gulf of Kutch, which is, of course, in Gujarat, which is the fourth major reef region in India. And in fact, it's only reef system along Indian west coast, which is considered as major reef systems. And what is characteristic of Gulf of Kutch is that they are tide influenced fringing reefs. So tidal amplitude is huge. It's located in turbid shallow waters with large temperature and salinity fluctuation. And despite this challenging condition, the reef here are incredibly hardy and resilient. There are a lot of pollutants are going, there are a lot of refineries which are nearby, but still reef are doing very well. And the Gulf of Kutch spans about 400 square kilometer area, and it supports 148 coral species from 44 genera. And I think it's an impressive number given the extreme environment, the kind of all the stressors that they go through. And I feel that these corals are, like all mainland corals, are true survivors, and they are adapted to thrive where few others can. So they are sort of a evolutionary or a living example of evolutionary resilience. I feel privileged that I've dived across all these four major reef regions, and from pristine lagoons of Lakshadweep to Andamans to Gulf of Mannar and hardy reefs of Kutch, especially in Bet Dwarka Islands. And beyond these major reefs, we also have numerous patchy reefs, which I have not spoken. But Sumer, who's currently setting up permanent monitoring plots and is doing some path-breaking research that's shedding new light on these lesser-known reef systems, and he will be talking more about them, as Abhishek mentioned in his brief. So over to you, Sumer.
All right. Thanks for that, Vardhan. And thank you for taking us through some of the larger reef systems along India's coast and the islands. Guys, for context, Vardhan has been diving a very, very long time. So During my undergrad, he was actually the first person I chosen and reached out to ask him if I could intern with him. Unfortunately, summer break at that point overlapped with the diving off season. So I didn't get to go, but he's been doing some really, really cool diving since, 2007, 2008. And thanks for that. Excited to hear your stories going forward. But I'm now going to be touching upon the patchy reef systems found along India's western coast. Sorry. So the West Coast is a space that I hold very dear because it's definitely novel and I'm going to be going into that, but it's also the place where I've been doing most of my diving for the last 3 years. And unlike the common, the reefs we usually associate with, thinking about reefs, right? There's no continuous reef structure, as some of the well-known has seen in some of the better-known reef systems. These reefs are actually made up of smaller, scattered patches of coral, and these range from dense clusters to areas of sparse growth. But despite their fragmented nature, these patches support a surprising variety of marine life. And so that's where our surveys kind of come in. Over the years, we've actually recorded over 18 genera of hard coral from the reefs of Malwan in Maharashtra, Grande Island in Goa, and Nethrani Island in Karnataka. And in addition to this, we've recorded over 120 different species of reef fish. These also include fish of commercial value, so fish that are fished for or sought after, sold, like jacks, mackerels, snappers, and groupers. So in terms of coral community composition, these West Coast sites are largely similar. The only outlier is probably Nethrani in the sense that it's a little more diverse, but coral community composition is broadly the same. And some of the most dominant growth forms you get here are encrusting species of coral, which basically, simply put, are corals that form a really thin layer over available substratum, over rock. And these are actually corals that have adapted to survive in low light conditions and low light environments. By basically spreading out and maximizing their surface area to capture sunlight. Having said that, though, just encrusting corals, that's not entirely true. These reefs aren't flat. They do have structure. So two of the most common large corals here belong to the genera Corites and Turbinaria. Corites are mounds, the typical huge, massive colonies you see on dives in the Andamans. Turbinaria are plate corals, so really large surface area again, and extend to about a meter and a half in diameter. And together, these two corals actually form denser, more three-dimensional reef structures, reef patches in several places within these sites. And it's just a really interesting space because you actually have smaller patches of, a more traditional reef versus larger areas of a more patchy habitat. So, it's quite something to explore and watch, especially when the visibility is good because, it can be quite incredible. In these West Coast reefs, space is often suitable substratum, availability of suitable substratum is a limiting factor. So again, another really cool observation when you're diving here or serving these sites is that you have a lot of corals fighting for the same space. You can have a suitable rock and you can have at least 4 or 5 different genera of corals actually fighting to kind of, cover that area and optimize and take over that space. So that's a really interesting, thing to see when you're diving here. Could I get the next slide, please? The next one. Yes, so this is a patchy reef habitat at Nethrani. You can see quite a lot of coral here, but it's spaced out. It's quite flat. It's mostly encrusting growth forms covering different rocks and suitable substratum. And if you go to the next slide, you can see some of the denser reef patches I was talking about. So this is Turbinaria. This is in Malwan. It's a site called King's Garden and completely covered with Turbinaria. So a really dense area, at least I'd estimate about 100 square meters, it's for these patchy reefs, it's quite a large habitat. And these areas actually have a lot of 3D structure. The reefs of the West Coast also what we call urban reefs. So small nearshore patches of corals that just sit off cities and towns. And usually, you can see them from the coastline or a beach. And it's actually this proximity to the coast that, makes them accessible, sure. But it's also, cause of many stressors. And these are largely to do with nutrient runoff from untreated sewage and drainage. This leads to increased levels of nitrogen and phosphorus in the water, which in turn leads to algal blooms. And you can see this on these sites. you go, even in this picture here, you can kind of see turf algae, the tiny filamentous algae just taking over coral. It's a really common sight on the edges of the image. And over time, this is actually called phase shifts when the algae outcompete coral and kind of take over. And this is something that we have been documenting across our study sites. So to sum up, while these reefs may not be as biodiverse as the reefs Vardhan was talking about, they do offer important insights into how corals actually persist in challenging environments, from pollution to being shallow, so prone to more temperature fluctuations. And studying these urban reefs actually helps us understand reef resilience better. And in addition to all of this, it's their proximity and accessibility that also helps, because we get to spend a lot of time on the water. And it just serves as a great classroom and natural laboratory for learning how reefs respond to these different stressors. So, I mean, if all the divers in the audience, I know the Andaman sounds really appealing, and they are also a little expensive, but I would highly recommend, checking out Goa, Grande Island, going to Malwa, doing some dives there, and Nesrani Island as well, the pinnacle of West Coast diving. Would highly recommend these sites. Thanks. Vardhan, have I missed anything in terms of West Coast reefs?
No, I think you're spot on. Thanks, Sumaya.
Thanks for the dive, NP, and thanks for the amazing intro to this webinar, guys. So I want to pick your mind on about surveying new sites and the methods and memories attached. So knowing where the reefs are is just the beginning. Surveying them, especially you need to dive in either new or very remote areas. It presents its whole unique set of challenges. So often painstaking, it's very technical work, long hours, but it also comes with its moments of real discovery and excitement. So, Varun, this one is just for you. You've been a part of many of these early efforts to map and monitor reefs across India. Could you just walk us through what that process typically involves, and maybe share a few stories about the first few exploratory days? Like what surprised you and what has stuck with you till date? Over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Absolutely. So I think my real experience with reef, as I mentioned, was in Andaman Islands, and someone who grew up in the city. When first time I got to visit, it felt like a dream. I had just finished my master's. It was 2004, and my work was with Reef Watch Marine Conservation at the time. And that's when the tsunami had hit, and we all know what happened in tsunami. It was a devastating event that changed the entire landscape of the islands, both above and below water. And I was assigned there to travel with a field assistant to assess the damage to the reef. And I have to say, it was surreal. It was like watching a movie. That on the surface, there was debris everywhere. Communities were completely shattered. More than 5,000 people had lost their life. And the island was still deep in recovery mode. And that's when my first experience was. And I was supposed to go underwater and survey these reefs. So of course, there was first few months went in helping with rehabilitation and with helping people. But then when I got the chance to go and snorkel over the reef, it was completely different. On the surface, we didn't think that what the damage would be. And even the big corals, which are as big as Maruti car, had toppled. All the acropora, the branching corals, they were all gone. There was a whole graveyard, and at few sites it felt like underwater graveyard. Corals were uprooted, broken structures, lifeless, silence. Of course, underwater world is very noisy, but there was some eerie silence. And yet, in other places, reefs had survived, and they seem untouched. They seem pristine. They seem like there's no impact whatsoever. And this is something that was very interesting. And that was my first experience of seeing the reef. And this sort of became basis of my PhD thesis. I focused on understanding how the major catastrophes like tsunami and bleaching affected the reefs differently across different locations, with the aim to understand questions such as why certain reefs are doing better than the others. Is it their inherent resilient, or are they more susceptible? Are some sites more susceptible than the others? What kind of traditional marine management system exists in the Nicobar? Or is there erosion of traditional management system in the face of major catastrophes? So these are some of the questions that I set out to answer. And keep in mind that this was back then, there was no dive schools in the Nicobar. So in fact, no one had dived in those waters. So we had to do a lot of like cowboy style of diving. We would carry lots of cylinders. So we would go on a small dinghy with portable compressor and 4 scuba tanks. And we would like start early. So first dive will be at 6 o'clock, and then we will be moving from one side to the other. So, and first it was of course surveying Nicobar, and then followed Andamans. But with a small team with field assistant, where we carried ration on the boat, we used to stay on the small boat, we used to sleep, we used to bathe, and we used to do island hopping from one island to another, diving, doing 2 to 3 dives, or sometimes even 4 dives a day, starting at 6 o'clock in the morning and ending at around 2 o'clock. And then because there was no light, we would finish all our work, including data entry, early. And this is how the earliest survey began. And that's when I started also thinking a little bit about the survey techniques. And what we were doing was essentially baseline biodiversity assessment, which is a snapshot of all species at a site. What is the percent cover of corals? How many fish are present using belt transit? What are the inwards? Overall coverage? What kind of habitat was available for coral recruits to settle? So these were things we were assessing and generating baseline data for the reef, and then repeating those surveys every year starting from 2008 to create sort of a robust data set in terms of so that we can assess what is the rate of recovery, what is the succession rates, how reefs are doing over time. We also use underwater visual sensors, which is diverse swim alongside transects, counting different fish species, which is great method for counting fish. And we did this belt transect for as well as zigzag transect for inwards and fish. We also use photo quadrants because quadrants are great. Because you get a record of image, and because underwater your time is a limiting agent, because you don't have much time underwater. If you have a picture, you can always analyze later. And so these are some of the techniques that I used back then. And I feel over the years I had privilege of surveying reefs across different seascapes, from Lakshadweep to Gulf of Mannar to Gulf of Kutch. I was working with Dr. Rohan Atha and his team. Yeah, he was conducting long-term monitoring, so I would also spend a lot of time in helping him or assisting him. And in Grand and Netrani Islands, I think I was lucky, thanks to WWF, who supported our work, and WCS India. I led biodiversity surveys in 2018 and 2019. Both the islands are home to some unique ecosystems, which Sumit just mentioned. And Dwarka Island is also something that is very unique. So there is a sunken city that is found off Dwarka. And that work was National Institute of Oceanography. That was, of course, way back in 2005. And I think in terms of, you asked me for like, what is the coverage? So in 2020, I had the opportunity to lead the expedition to Angria Bank. Angria Bank, for people who don't know, it's a sunken reef system located nearly 135 kilometers offshore from Sindhudurg, west coast of India. And it was a 10-day expedition. We were on FORV Sagar Sampada, CMLRE was generous to support and to give us that expedition. The expedition was in collaboration with WCS India and CMLRE, Mangrove Foundation, and many other organizations, including WI, who supported. What is unique about Angria Bank is that the depth. So the reef there starts at 28 meters, which makes your dive time very less. So in that less dive time, you are supposed to collect maximum amount of data. But despite the logistical and physical difficulties, we were able to collect significant data. What we saw was stunning reef, was vibrant and beautiful, and I would equate that to something that is present in Andaman or Lakshadweep because of the visibility, and also because of how the reefs are. We were able to document exceptional biodiversity in these regions, and also come up with a strategy or management plan, as well as we push the papers so that this area can be declared as a protected area. Because this is the area which falls under EEZ, which is Exclusive Economic Zone of India. And I feel that is really nice, and that piece of work is something I feel very happy to talk about, because it's something that we achieve in very less time a lot. And of course, journey is still ongoing. Every reef, every dive, every polyp you see, or every expedition that you go is always continues to teach something new. So when you talk about experiences, there are too many, and I can just go on and on. But of course, in the interest of time, yeah, I would pause and hand over to you, Abhishek and Sumer. Thanks.
Thank you, Vardhan. Just a quick announcement. So our little technical issue on YouTube has now been resolved. So for people who want to also share the YouTube link or log on there, it's completely up to you now. Yeah, Vardhan. So that was actually, it sounds like, I mean, when one hears of diving, it sounds very idyllic, but it is obviously very intense and intricate work as well, the work that you do. But it was nice to see how, like, while you're describing all of it, your face lights up. So it's obviously very rewarding work. Uh, I'd like to switch it up a little, bring it to the subject of reef health. In recent years, coral bleaching has become a very familiar term in conversations around climate change, but there's still a lot of confusion around what it actually means for reefs and how scientists like you and Sumer actually view it and study it, observe it, etc. So, Sumer, this one's for you. Could you break it down for us? What exactly are the threats to corals? What causes bleaching eventually, and how do researchers monitor the impacts over time? More importantly, what do these observations tell us about how different reef systems are responding to climate change?
Thanks for that, Abhishek. So I'm going to start with the basics, a little bit about coral morphology. So as you know, corals are animals. They're colonial animals, though. So that's hundreds to thousands of tiny individual animals called polyps that kind of come together. And polyps, corals are closely related to jellyfish and sea anemones, belong to the phylum Cnidaria. And in most cases, you find corals living attached to the reef, with each polyp sitting in a cup of calcium carbonate, as you can see in this image. So each of those pentagonal cells you see is called a coralite, and inside which, a polyp's actually living. Over time, these colonies grow and form the limestone structures that we call coral reefs. Corals are usually found in sunlit waters because they have a unique relationship with a microscopic algae, more specifically called dinoflagellates or zooxanthellae. And these actually live inside coral tissue. These algae photosynthesize, turning sunlight into food, and in return, the corals provide both nutrients and a safe home. The rest of the food, however, is derived via filter feeding, and this is actually something really cool to witness. So what filter feeding is that the polyps actually come out of the skeleton, extend their tentacles, and use these tentacles to actually trap tiny marine organisms called zooplankton. This is something you can usually see at night. So if you're out snorkeling in the day and you kind of go and look at the same coral colony at night, you can actually see the tentacles extended, swaying in the current, picking up tiny pieces of organic matter. And it's a little unnerving at first, but it's something that's really cool to watch. So what happens is when ocean temperatures rise above the summer average, even by just 1 degree Celsius, for several weeks, the relationship between a coral and its symbiotic algae actually changes. It breaks down, the algae are expelled, and this leaves the coral tissue transparent. So, the whitening you see, bleaching, is actually the coral skeleton that is now visible in the absence of its algae and their pigments. Bleaching doesn't mean that, the coral is necessarily going to die, but without their algae, corals can lose up to 95% of their energy source. And if temperatures don't return to normal quickly, this results in death. However, even if a coral does survive bleaching, this doesn't mean it's in the clear. There are lasting effects. Growth and reproduction are usually hampered. They're slowed down for years to come. Also, prevalence of disease is usually a lot higher after a bleaching event. So, reefs do struggle to recover. And it's also important to note that, the weakening of corals actually triggers something called phase shifts. I spoke about this earlier, where reefs that were once dominated by corals become overgrown by algae. And this is something we see very commonly in our West Coast reef sites. And, you do come across multiple coral colonies just covered by a thin layer of turf algae. Or at Nitrani, for example, we've been seeing this larger macroalgae that just forms this carpet everywhere. Any available substratum, coral, raw, it's just completely inundated. So monitoring bleaching and coral recovery is important because it helps us understand which reefs are vulnerable, which species or which genera, because we're not at a point where we can actually look at coral species because this requires both molecular work and microscopy. So we currently work with corals at a genera level, but with genera more resilient, and how the ecosystem as a whole is changing through time. And without this information, we can't really track the long-term impacts of rising temperatures or identify reefs that are bouncing back, and more importantly, why they're bouncing back, secrets of resilience. This is information we don't have access to. And that's why actively monitoring bleaching, and pre-bleaching, bleaching, and recovery. And this actually can lead to a lot of conservation action on ground. So anywhere from, establishing a protected area or, like informing restoration work. You can also actively manage a site. For example, this happened in Thailand recently during the global bleaching event, where tourism at a site was actually restricted because corals over there were exposed to, huge thermal stress. And, you can kind of restrict anthropogenic stressors, direct anthropogenic stressors at a particular site during periods of vulnerability. We now actually, interestingly, have tools that allow us to predict when and where bleaching is likely to occur. And these tools help prioritize where to look, when to mobilize, and which sites might need urgent attention. And these actually really complement in water surveys by making these efforts far more targeted and also timelier. And this holds especially true during periods of widespread bleaching, widespread heat events, because you can, target surveys and cover different sites through time. So to track heat stress, we use, can we get the next slide, please? The graph. Yes. So to track heat stress, we use a metric called degree heating week, so DHWs. This basically what it does is it measures how much heat a reef has experienced over the past 12 weeks, and specifically when the temperatures are above the monthly average for that particular, the warmest monthly average for that year. So for example, if a reef experiences temperatures 1 degree Celsius above normal for 4 weeks, that equals 4 DHWs. Once reefs hit 4 HWs, that's when we kind of expect bleaching to set in. And anything above 8 DHWs usually leads to mass bleaching and mortality. And just for context, so in 2023 and 2024, during the mass bleaching event, many reefs exceeded both 12 and 16 DHWs, and those levels of thermal stress are like simply catastrophic. It's unheard of. And yes, so for our work, this is what we refer to. We refer to the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration's Coral Reef Watch, and this helps us track sea surface temperatures using satellite data. This data helps us identify where coral reefs are experiencing stress and where bleaching is likely occurring. And we use this information to kind of inform our bleaching surveys, when we need to be in the water, what we need to be looking for. And yes, we do this by, like Vardhan spoke about some of the field methods, but we have permanent transects delineated. So we lay pieces of, sections of tape and kind of look at the same coral colonies through time. So we look at them, pre-bleaching, during, post, recovery, and we kind of have a trajectory as to how they're doing. And we have this information for different coral genera. So like working on a hardiness index of sorts, because as I spoke about, different corals respond differently to temperature stress. So yeah, we actually just finished our dives for the season recently, second week of May. I was in the water at Netrani. And before this, the last time I was at Netrani was a month before that. Corals were healthy. In the span of 4 weeks, we went from seeing absolutely no bleaching to almost 70% of the corals in our sample area exhibiting some sign of bleaching, be it paling, be it partial bleaching, complete bleaching. And this was really interesting because we went from a 2 degree heating weeks thermal stress threshold to a 6 degree heating weeks thermal stress threshold during those 4 weeks. And that's all it took. So I mean, this graph kind of shows, so for the Western India station, it shows us where we stand in terms of degree heating weeks, the y-axis on the right. So we're currently at about closing in on 11 DHWs. And when we were at Netrani about 12-ish, 14 days ago, we were close to 6. And this correlates with alert level 2. So, it's bordering widespread bleaching. And you can actually see these effects underwater. I hope this covers what bleaching was like and what bleaching looks like, how we monitor for it, and some of the tools we refer to. Thanks.
That is a very, very sobering chart. And the fact that you said within a month, Netrani actually changed from looking healthy to showing.
Yes. So can I actually get back to this image? So this is a poor coral, and these guys are super hardy, also slow growing. They were the last to bleach. But if you go to the other slide, sorry, a little before. Yeah. So, I mean, we saw false sparrow corals bleach quite early on. The slide before this is of Coccinera or Seaf corals, and these were also some of the first to go. So, we kind of saw this gradual transition where we saw some of the less tolerant species go, followed by eventually the varieties, the hardier species. But, even then, at about 6 to 8 DHWs, we weren't seeing a complete bleaching of varieties. So it's interesting to kind of record these trends, understanding bleaching on a seasonal level. And that's some of the work we're doing. Yeah, thanks.
That is intense. So I'd like to just bring it over to a slightly lighter side of this webinar now. So Vardhan, Sumer, both of you have spent countless hours underwater, and sometimes it's the quiet, unscripted moments that really stay with you. Maybe an unusual sighting, some rare faunal behavior, or just the magic of being at the right place at the right time. I'm sure both of you have had a few. So I'd love to hear from you both about some of the memorable experiences from your dives. Any stories that really capture the beauty, the wonder, and complexity of these ecosystems? Vardhan, I'd like to start with you.
Thanks, Abhishek. I think it's a difficult question because difficult to choose just one experience as the most memorable. Because I think truly every dive is special and every dive is a new experience. So it's difficult, but if I had to pick, I think diving at Cabra Island. Cabra Island is in Little Nicobar or very close to Little Nicobar, which is the southernmost island and in Nicobar. And this was in 2006. And it was truly exceptional because of the vividity of the reef, and all the other sites, as I mentioned, were damaged. But there was a Cabra Island, which was exceptionally beautiful. It was untouched, pristine, and it was teeming with life. And I think the clarity of water, the diversity of species, the sense of being somewhere few had explored, and I think that all came together. And I think that was something I feel transformative as well. That is very memorable because that was my first experience of diving there. And so I think Cabra Island is definitely, I think, exceptional. There are also other few moments which are strong, and I have strong memory about them. So I once encountered a dugong out of the blue and in Neil Island, and that is something very special because I was swimming with a friend, and we were snorkeling, and she tapped me and saying that there is something, and there was right behind a big sort of almost 2 meter plus dugong right next to us, and that was exceptional. I also had one sort of a funny thing. I used to wear a ring, and once I was snorkeling, and a friend tapped to show me something. There was a batfish or something, and she accidentally tapped it here. The ring fell and it went underwater. It started going down, and there was a big trevally. A jack came and took the ring, gobbled the ring, and disappeared. And I was of course later duck diving, tried to retrieve, but that was gone. The fish had eaten that ring, which was gold ring. So that is something I lost, but I think that was also, I'll never forget that experience. And of course, there are many other memories that I can go on and on. Few others is, of course, Bitra Island. There is a fish aggregation, group aggregation that we saw. And group aggregation is something unique. It happens during no moon or new moon, where all the groupers from distant reef, they come to mate, and they release gametes together. And there's a synchronous release of gametes. And it feels like sound and light show where they come together, they release gametes. And I think it's beautiful. It's out of the world to see that. Also, there are some other sites which are exceptional. There is a Tilingchong Island in Central Nicobar, which is again very beautiful. We called it Grand Canyon when we dived there and we were exploring for the first time, because there were these dramatic, huge boulders and you have to dive through them. And because the currents were high, you start and you just come out somewhere else. And that was something altogether different. And I think, of course, I can go on. There are so many experiences that are there. But I think what all these experiences, if I have to synthesize of what they talk and what is the story that they talk is they talk about the complexity, they talk about the beauty, they talk about fragility of the reef, and I think why it's important to protect them, why it's important to observe them without any question in mind, just observe them and just enjoy the experience. Yeah, I think these are few experiences that I would love, I cherish.
I think what really
Thanks for
stood
that,
out was
Vardhan.
how you lost your ring. So, people lose stuff all the time, but this is really an epic account of how to lose something.
No,
So
it's
yeah,
hilarious
Sumit,
because you hear about, these predatory fish going after shiny objects. I think it's the first time I've heard of one consuming one. Yeah, what an experience, truly. But mine are a little underwhelming in comparison. But one of my most memorable and recent dives also comparatively was the first time I ever dived in Goa, right? And that's the image you're seeing here. This is actually a couple of days later when the visibility was a little better, but this was, Goa on a bad day. And it was my first time in Goa ever, first time the team ever dived in Goa. So, we had no frame of reference as to what good diving conditions look like. Especially choppy day, water from the surface was just cloudy as we couldn't see the bottom, nothing. And so we get up, we get in the water and descend. Visibility was less than a meter. So, that's kind of the signal that divers do to each other. Poor visibility, signaling can't see much. All of us have our hands up, go to the bottom. I don't realize I've hit the bottom because I can't really see anything. We were supposed to be doing a fish survey that day. And yeah, I basically swam the transect at least thrice, didn't end up recording a single fish. It was, and in your mind, right, first time you're diving at the site, you're trying to set up a program, no frame of references to what it's like. And it just makes you think that, are we ever going to work here? But it changed because we come back the next day and we got dived at the same site. And it's crazy as to the landscape, the seascape that, went unnoticed the previous day. So it went from, this was at Coral Garden. It's one of the more popular sites in Goa. I think a crowd favorite in general because it's got a really nice dense patch of Turbonaria corals. And it's a beautiful seascape. Lots of three-dimensional structure, lots of fish. And we went from not being able to see anything to actually getting, this beautiful view of this impressive reef. And it was one of my favorite dives because, it really makes you think, right? Like corals are surviving in this. There is like innate resilience here. You go from days where there's absolutely no light penetration to, just having this dramatic landscape and seascape in front of you. And yeah, that was definitely one of my favorite dives. Also, recently, we were diving at Nethrani. This is another recent one. And one of the first times I actually went to a site with a mission. The mission was, I really want to see an acropora. So I read a paper, acropora, a genus of corals that are quite common in places, tropical reefs, the Andamans, Lakshadweep, not so common along the Indian mainland coast. There have only been a few records. There are records from the southwestern portion of India's mainland coast. But again, older records, no real way to confirm. There were recent records in 2020 of seeing acropora at Nethrani. So that was the mission we went with. So, we want to dive out with other people, sharing the space with tourists. I've given everyone the lowdown, right? This is what you got to look for. Can we go to the next slide, please? The next one. This is actually Vardhan's. But yeah, this is what an acropora colony looks like, previous. Yeah. Maybe. Sorry, the next one. Yeah. So it's a branching colony identified with the axial coralites, the larger coralites you see at each tip of each branch. And showed a couple of sample pictures to people. This is what you got to look for. People went out, no reports. Until finally one day, had kind of given up hope, right? We moved our boat. I get in the water, and right under us is a colony. It was incredible. Like after targeted searching for days, right? You just end up happening to be over one. And I mean, I know people scream when they see, in their heads, when they see manta, sharks and stuff. For me, it was this coral. We ended up finding 2 corals that day and belonging to the same genus. And what makes this observation special is that, it kind of points to broader connectivity between these reef habitats. So, I mean, there's Lakshadweep, there's Parkway, and there is a chance there is a small self-sustaining population in Nethrani, but it is a lot more likely, given that these were also smaller colonies, that there is ecological connectivity, and that means such a huge deal, right? And this is also why I really love diving these West Coast sites. I agree they might be a little more diminished in terms of diversity in life, but it really makes you pay attention and search for the smaller stuff. And yeah, definitely a favorite dive.
Excellent. And also talk about being at the right place at the right time.
For
So,
sure.
yeah. So, I'd like to close this, webinar now. So, just the last bit of it. As both of you are involved in work that is helping shape the next phase of reef conservation in India, whether through tools like 3D mapping or long-term programs along the West Coast. So, just to sum it up, Vardhan, could you tell us a bit about how new technologies, especially like photogrammetry, are opening up new possibilities for research? And then, Sumer, after, could you just share a bit about the work that WWF India is doing right now and where you see it heading in the coming few years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like in many other fields, technology is definitely a game changer in the way we conduct research or how the way we look at the research or look at the reef. I think one of the biggest limitation we face underwater is time, because you have limited time. Your scuba diving restricts you to maybe spend maximum 1 hour underwater. And of course, now there are other, like you can use trimix, you can use different mix, and you can try to spend more time underwater. But I think still there is limitation as compared to terrestrial. If you're surveying, say, rainforest, you can spend 6 hours surveying, doing transects, collecting data, which is not true underwater. And I think that is one of the limitation. But in terms of tools, because that's what you asked, is I think nowadays there are GoPros, so you can set them and they can continuously record footage, capturing not just snapshot of reef life, but also behavior, which allows us to explore much broader range of research questions. And I think that is great. Second tool, which is also so the whole use of camera or use of passive recording of reef polyps or behavior, I think that is something that researchers are using increasingly. Besides, of course, photogrammetry, which is also another exciting technology, which is nowadays many people are using. And my team is in Seychelles. We have a project in Port Lune where we have using photogrammetry technology. So what we are doing here, simply put, it's a process of taking series of overlapping photos from different angles and using software to create 3D image. So if you take a image, it's a 2D image. What it does is that the software extracts geometric information and makes 2D to 3D models. And how it does is that more the picture, the better your model is. So all you need to do is like take series of pictures. And just like how those Google images, which is like you see whole 3D image of the roads or of the picture, similar thing you get of the reef. And this is what we are doing in Port Lune Marine National Park. What we are doing is that we have trained volunteers and interns, and they are the one who are collecting range of pictures over the transect. Software stitches all these images and gives us this three-dimensional image. And because we are doing this over time, we can track what kind of changes that are happening over time. Why we are also flying drones. So for drones, flying drones is also another technology that people are using increasingly. And again, same like photogrammetry technique where you take series of image. You take series of image when your drone is flying. And again, that when you stitch it, you get an entire 3D map of the reef from top. If you do this from below, so you get top, below, and it's three-dimensional. So you get a sort of overall picture. The only thing is you need a good visibility, because only if you have good visibility, you will be able to see the reef and the finer nuances of the polyps or the reef structure. And reef is three-dimensional, is extraordinary robust, and the rugosity is very high. So it's very important to capture that. And I think photogrammetry really allows you to do that, which is great. And we are doing this, and this project that I am leading is to assess the effectiveness of marine protected areas. And the aim is to expand marine protected areas, because marine protected areas are considered as panacea for marine conservation. And photogrammetry as a tool is really going to help us to see that this is the live coral cover, this is what the changes are, and this is how we can expand, or this is how we can strengthen their effectiveness, which is great. There are a few other techniques which researchers are using beyond visual. Is something that people are using is acoustics, because reef soundscape is another game changer in terms of how we have started seeing the reef. When people earlier thought that when you go underwater, it's extremely quiet and all you hear is your bubbles of your scuba, but that's not true. Reefs are extremely noisy. There are a lot of the snapping shrimps, and there are nowadays hydrophones as well as passive acoustic monitoring devices, which allows you to record the reef. And there is a hypothesis that the healthy reefs are more noisy as compared to degraded reefs. So you can actually set up these passive acoustic monitoring devices, which allows you to record the reef sound. And you can find out what is the healthy reef, or you can find out the derived healthy reef index and try to find out how your reef is faring. Also, reef fish are very noisy, just like terrestrial animals. And this is something very unique, and people are now beginning to understand that and how reef fish are communicating. And that is also through use of this acoustic recorders, passive acoustic recorders. And that is something incredible. And I attempted, so in Andaman, I have deployed a few passive acoustic devices to understand the reef system. But of course, because of the COVID, I had to stop the work. But maybe in other parts, I aim to continue that work. Besides few other technology, there are many other technologies which are changing game. There's environment DNA. Sumer also mentioned about molecular techniques, because species like there are two aspects when it comes to studying reef. One is, of course, taxonomy. We don't understand how many species are there, and molecular taxonomy is really helping in narrowing down what species are, because earlier we were only relying on morphology, which is now changing because molecular stuff is possible. Besides, environment DNA gives a broad index of what is happening or how many species are there. So there are a lot of these new techniques which is allowing us to answer these fine scales question, or question that earlier we couldn't even think that we can answer. And definitely that more knowledge we have, we understand the reef, that will help us to go one step beyond, where we can start conserving the reef or think of what are the different ways of conserving the reef. Yeah, I think, Sumer, you want to add something?
Thanks, Vardhan. No, photogrammetry is really exciting, and it's something we hope also to kind of incorporate in our work. Yeah, thank you for that. I can't even imagine, what it was like just doing this work in the Seychelles also must have just been absolutely incredible. But I'm going to take the conversation to the work that WWF-India is doing right now. So just a brief on the work we're doing, the work we finished, what the plan is going forward. And yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we're working along the southern western coast. So 3 sites, basically. This includes Malwan in Maharashtra, and it's a nearshore reef that for the most part lies in and around the famous Sindhudurg fort. There are also rocky outcrops in that region, and which do support some scattered patchy reefs, but the Malwan area is one of our sites. There's the Grande Island complex in Goa. This is right off the coast of Vasco. So again, like you're on Baina Beach and you can see the islands right in front of you. It's incredible, like how close they are, 5 to 7 kilometers tops. And it's a 2-island chain. Again, very beautiful site, lots of interesting species inhabited. And our third and my personal favorite in terms of sites is Netrani Island. This is off the coast of Murudeshwar in Karnataka. What makes Netrani a little different is it's about 20 kilometers into the sea. So, you're not limited or overrun by turbid waters, conditions that are prevalent in Goa and Malwan. It's a little different, both in terms of diversity and in terms of, the conditions you can expect. On a good day, you can get like 20 meters of visibility, which is so hard to fathom for like a mainland site. But anyway, with respect to what we're doing at these sites, we've actually initiated this process by undertaking baseline assessments, looking at coral diversity, distribution, that is, where within these sites are subsites of high conservation value located, because reef structure, abundance of corals changes depending on where you are with relation to the island. And also looking at coral status, health and status. This includes bleaching, disease prevalence, and also the presence of a lot of macroboro communities. As you can see in this image, these are coral barnacles. So they're essentially bivalves, like clams, two shells, which kind of like bore into corals. And here you can actually see the barnacle with its, filter feeding in the water column. And if you go to the next one, please. This is actually an interesting mix of different issues that this coral is facing. But the larger patches that you see are actually the work of alpheus shrimp. So these are shrimp that bore into the coral, and this has then been overtaken by algae, which is all the red matty stuff you've seen. The orange patch is a boring sponge. The tinier holes in the coral are vomited snails. So again, like just macroborer community prevalence is something we're looking at. And we're basically trying to understand these systems as best as we can, studying seasonal changes, investigating the ecological processes that shape and govern these reefs, and to some extent trying to predict what these reefs might look like in the future. I also spoke about some of the threats that these systems face, but it's worth repeating, these are really multi-use spaces. I remember the first time I went to Malwan, it was just simply mind-blowing as to, just the different people or the different stakeholders that utilize this space, from fishers to tourism operators, and to people who are just going to see the fort. And they are multi-use spaces. It's something that everyone, I think, must experience. But as a result of this, there's also a much higher human footprint on these reef systems. And I'd say the two main stakeholder groups are definitely fishers and dive tourism operators. And we're in the process of mapping out both the stakeholder groups, their relationship with the reefs, spatial use, temporal patterns, and we're also exploring some of the cultural dimensions of the islands themselves. So both Nitrani and Grande Island are used by local fishing communities to kind of give thanks and to like a bountiful fishing season. So the relationship that different stakeholder groups have with these reef systems is something that we're also exploring. And all of this feeds into the larger, like broader goal we have set, which is, to secure some form of designation for these sites, for these different island systems. And our vision is one of active management, which is kind of led by these stakeholder groups who rely on these systems for their livelihoods. And so to sum up, like a three-pronged approach, we're currently fixing our baselines. We kind of have those in place this season. We're also we have set up protocols for long-term monitoring. We are mapping out and intend to work with fishers and the dive tourism industry to kind of, work towards some form of active management, along with, of course, forest departments and biodiversity boards, and eventually work towards some form of designation. So yes, that's where we stand.
Thank you for both for that. So we're officially a little over time. So even though there are 5 questions, I'll just take the last 2. And a few of them are from Dr. Satya. So just a heads up, I will drop my email in the comments and then we can take up those other questions later. So I think somewhere the first question, which I think kind of leads in from what you were just speaking about. Dr. Satya asked, what are the key coral restoration strategies currently being implemented in India? And how effective have they been in enhancing reef resilience against climate stressors like ocean acidification and bleaching? So either of you can take this up, please.
Okay, I'm going to start and Vardhan can maybe take it from there. But in India, in my knowledge, restoration is limited to, asexual forms of restoration, which essentially involves fragmentation. You're taking fragments of existing coral colonies and attaching them to suitable substratum. So they're essentially clones of, the host colony. Coastal Impact is an organization that's doing some really good work in Goa. Reef Watch is working in the Andamans. I believe DST, the Department of Science and Technology, is doing some work on these lines in Lakshadweep. I cannot at this point think of anyone else, but from what I know, most of these methods are limited to fragmentation. I don't think anyone is actually exploring any of the more, ex situ, so lab-based restoration techniques where either gametes or fragments are taken out of the water and kind of, reared there for a little bit before being replanted. Vardhan's work in the Seychelles, I'm sure, involves restoration on some different scales, right? I mean, Nature Seychelles does quite a bit of work there, and they do,
Yeah, I think there are also other few organizations which are, there's WTI, they are working in Gulf of Kutch. As you said, DST is another one. There's Cuddle Life Foundation, they are working in Pondicherry. So there are a lot of restoration effort or restoration strategies, but if you talk about strategies, mainly transplanting a coral from one place to another, tying it on the reef. There are also some structures that are deployed because there are metal structures as well as cement structures are known to attract coral recruits or coral larvae, and then corals can go up. But then we have not achieved much success with that because there is a limitation. Of course, if you drop anything underwater, it's going to grow, the marine life is going to grow. And for corals to settle, to survive, they need that hard substratum. And the attempt is to provide that hard substratum so that coral larvae can come and they can start growing on that. While there is a limited success, these are few strategies that are used in India. And your second part of question is how effective they are in increasing overall reef resilience against climate change. I think very like in terms of while there is an attempt, there's a limited success because when there is a bleaching, when there is a major catastrophe such as storm, cyclone, or tsunami, they are the first one to go because the reefs that are on structures or the corals that are growing on the structures, they are not sturdy. They are not settled in many places, so they are the one who are going down the first. And overall, the success is not high, but having said that, there is an effort to ensure that the restoration strategies can be adapted.
Just to add in quickly to what Vardhan said, this also varies depending on sites and the species you're working with for restoration. So, for instance, Acropora are really fast-growing corals and usually the subject of most restoration efforts worldwide. But if we're talking about the West Coast where Acropora are not present, the species you're working with are very different and slower growth rates perhaps. So you don't necessarily see immediate results. It does take time and yeah.
Yeah, that's so true.
Thank you both. So I'll just give you another. Anil Singh Best asked, what threats do coral reefs face from human intervention? What are the other threats other than bleaching? And is there a way to undo bleaching? And the last one from him is, how do corals breed? Also, if they are animals, do they have red data status too? Sorry, that was last. Over to you.
So I think, Sumer, because you are talking about coral bleaching, you can take the second question because you are mentioning. First question, what threats coral reefs face from human intervention? And I think that's a interesting question because when we talk about intervention, that itself is an issue because we look at the system and when there is an ecosystem, we tend to approach it and we think that we can use engineering solution to solve the issues. And that means we can intervene and use engineering solutions to restore reef or to do various things. And I think if it is viewed from that, there are many interventions we are doing, including throwing all kinds of garbage to in the name of restoration, we are putting these huge structures, cement structures underwater, which is not really helping. There are also a range of other threats. Bleaching is a global phenomena which happens due to increase in sea surface temperature. But then what is bleaching when there is any form of stress? It could be pollution induced, it could be due to increase in temperature, or it could be due to change in chemical composition of water. There is bleaching. So bleaching is more of a response that coral, the zooxanthellae gets expelled out. So these are all the threats, and we know that all the development pressures that are there, all the coastlines are densely populated, all the nutrients are going in the water because of the high nutrient, the whole overall pH level changes. There is more ocean acidification. Even ocean acidification has changes the ocean chemistry, and even the calcium carbonate structure dissolves because of that. So these are some of the broader threats, besides of course fishing, which leads to removal of top predators, changes the ecosystem balance. So the threats are many. I think the question to ask is that yes, there are threats. How do we address some of these questions, some of these threats, and what can we do to minimize some of the stresses? Like how do we ensure that we support reefs that are resilient and ensure that they remain intact?
Thanks, Vardhan. I think you've covered most of it. With respect to bleaching, I did kind of speak about this a little earlier. It's not a death sentence. There is recovery. So actually saying that, some level of bleaching, paling, it's a usual seasonal process, right? Your water by default gets hotter during summer months. It cools down during the monsoon. So a cycle of bleaching and recovery is normal. What we're seeing right now, though, is extended periods of elevated sea surface temperatures, and it's basically the scale of it and the frequency. So, corals getting less time to recover, and that's where you're seeing this mass mortality. But again, like at least from the sites where I work, it's interesting to remember that these are by default resilient species. Given that they survive at these sites, and we're still actually seeing bleaching and across and also mortality. So yeah, I mean, the outlook currently isn't too great, but yeah. Sorry, did I miss anything pertaining to bleaching?
So the question was, how do you undo bleaching, which I think you've covered. They are resilient as well.
It's a natural, yeah.
Yeah. And just the last part of the question was, if they're animals too, do they have a red data status?
Oh, that's a good question. I am not sure. I do, yeah.
Yeah, so total there are 340 species of corals that are under threatened status, including staghorn coral, which is Acropora, cervicornis or Alcon corals. They're categorized as critically endangered. But all these IUCN red list threat assessment is very region specific. So we have this, like the study, this data, the study is done from Caribbeans. But yes, we have lots of species which are under red list status. In terms of from Indian government, all corals are protected under in Schedule 1 of the Indian Wildlife Protection Act 1972, which means that they have given highest level of legal protection. And it means that touching a coral is as good as touching a tiger or something, and the punishment is similar because they're under Schedule 1. So you're not allowed to touch, you're not allowed to capture, you're not allowed to handle the animal, and if you do, then you need to secure permit. While it is good, it also hampers some of the research because you cannot do many things, because you cannot collect the corals from which is also something to note. But definitely there are a lot of species which are under IUCN red list status.
Okay. I feel like you guys covered a lot of ground, or if I may, covered a lot of water here. And I feel like that it leaves us in like a very informed and optimistic position about it. Thank you both for taking out the time. And thank you to my colleagues, Somrit and Rohit, for also helping me out, helping us out on the tech part of it. So thank you everyone for joining in. And we're looking forward to everyone celebrating Reef Awareness Day, which is day after on the 1st of June. Thank you, Vardhan, for joining us again. And thank you, Sumer. It was a brilliantly insightful discussion with you both. And that's it. So I hope everyone has a great evening, and goodbye.
Thanks, Abhishek. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, Abhishek. Thanks, everyone. And if any questions, then do reach out. Happy to answer the questions as well.
Yeah. Bye-bye.